The mating ceremony was supposed to bind her to the alpha forever. But when he touched her wolf rejected him. And across the crowd, another wolf growled. The wrong mate had awakened her bond. The incense cloyed in Lyra's throat as Alpha Silas reached for her hand. This was the moment, the sacred binding. The crescent pack held its breath, waiting for the golden glow of the Luna bond to seal their future. But as his fingers brushed her skin, Lyra didn't feel the warmth of destiny. She felt a freezing, jagged rejection. Her wolf didn't just growl, she screamed. The rejection rippled through the arena like a physical shockwave, extinguishing the ceremonial fires. In the sudden, suffocating silence, a low, predatory rumble answered from the shadows. Everyone turned. There, at the edge of the pit, bound in silver-flecked chains, stood Kale the exile, the traitor. As their eyes locked, a bolt of white-hot lightning fused their souls. The bond hadn't failed. It had simply found its true target. Him, Silas roared, his face contorting. Lyra couldn't answer. Her heart wasn't beating for her alpha anymore. It was beating for his enemy.
Welcome to Alpha King Romance Diaries, where passion meets power and love always reigns supreme. This channel is your escape into powerful love stories, deep emotions, and irresistible alpha energy. Hit subscribe and join the kingdom. You don't want to miss what's coming next. Stay tuned, the fun is just getting started.
The air in the sacred circle was thick with the scent of crushed pine and ancient incense, a perfume that was supposed to herald the dawn of a new era. Lyra stood atop the lunar dais, her white silk gown fluttering in the mountain breeze. Before her stood Alpha Silas, his presence a mountain of practiced authority and groomed power. As he reached out to take her hand, the elders began the chant, a low, rhythmic thrum that vibrated in the soles of her feet. "By the blood of the moon," Silas murmured, his eyes locking onto hers with a possessive glint that turned her stomach. "I claim what is mine." His fingers, cold and commanding, closed around her wrist. In that heartbeat, the world fractured. Instead of the warm, golden hum of a fated connection, a jagged bolt of ice shot through Lyra's veins. Her wolf didn't just growl. She erupted in a feral, agonizing scream that echoed through the telepathic link of every shifter present. It was a physical rejection so violent that Lyra's body acted before her mind could process the horror. She recoiled as if his touch were molten silver. Her skin blistered where he had gripped her, the golden wedding mark on her wrist turning a bruised, necrotic black before shattering into embers that vanished in the wind. The force of the spiritual backlash sent Silas staggering back, his crown of laurel leaves falling into the dirt. The chant died instantly. A suffocating silence fell over the thousands gathered in the arena, broken only by the sound of Lyra's ragged, panicked breathing. "Lyra," Silas's voice was a low, dangerous warning. He recovered quickly, his face darkening with a mixture of humiliation and fury. "What is this? Reach for me again. Complete the bond." I can't," she gasped, clutching her burned wrist to her chest. Her wolf was packing a frantic circle in her mind, teeth bared not at an enemy in the woods, but at the man who was supposed to be her soul's anchor. Suddenly, the silence was shattered from the edge of the pit. A low, guttural growl ripped through the air, a sound so primal it made the hair on Lyra's neck stand up. It didn't come from the Alpha's elite guard. It came from the shadows of the prisoner's cage, where Kale stood draped in heavy iron. The exile raised his head, his dark hair falling away to reveal eyes that burned with a terrifying silver intensity. For the first time in her life, Lyra's wolf went silent, not out of fear, but out of recognition. The chaos of the ceremony faded into a dull roar as the air between Lyra and the prisoner began to hum with a forbidden, magnetic heat. The Alpha had the title, but the man in chains held her soul. What no one in the pack understood was that rejection didn't mean she was unwanted. "Kill him," Silas hissed, sensing the shift in the wind. "Kill the traitor now." The scent of damp stone and stale iron clung to the walls of the underground oubliette, a suffocating contrast to the pine-scented mountain air Lyra had breathed only hours ago. She moved like a ghost, her silk gown ruined and trailing through the grime of the dungeon floor. The guards were upstairs, drowning their confusion in ale after the disastrous ceremony, leaving the silence of the pits to be broken only by the rhythmic dripping of water. At the very end of the corridor, behind a grate of silver-flecked steel, sat the man who had shattered her world without speaking a word. Cale was a silhouette of jagged edges and raw power, his chest bared and streaked with the soot of his captivity. Heavy manacles bound his wrists to the weeping stone walls, the metal etched with suppression runes that pulsed with a faint, sickly purple light. As Lyra approached, the air began to vibrate. It wasn't the jagged ice of Silas's touch. It was a low, humming heat that started in her marrow and radiated outward. "You shouldn't be here, Luna," Cale rasped. His voice was like grinding gravel, unused to anything but growls. "I'm not his Luna," Lyra whispered, her voice trembling. "The bond, it didn't just break, Cale, it pointed." She reached through the bars, her fingers hovering inches from the cold iron of his chains. Cale flinched, a warning look flashing in his dark eyes, but he didn't pull away. When her skin finally made contact with the silver-flecked metal, the suppression runes didn't just dim, they screamed. A surge of white-hot energy erupted from the point of contact, a violent, beautiful confluence of two souls finally finding their anchor. The purple glow of the Alpha's magic was incinerated by a blinding silver light that raced up Lyra's arms and flooded Cale's veins. It wasn't pain, it was a homecoming. In that instant, Lyra didn't just see Cale, she felt him. She felt his years of isolation, his burning sense of injustice, and a fierce, protective hunger that eclipsed everything she had been taught about duty. The iron beneath her hands began to soften, the metal groaning as their combined resonance pushed against the physical world. Cale gasped, his head falling back against the stone as his eyes flared with a brilliance that matched her own. The bond wasn't a tether, it was an awakening. "The runes," she breathed, watching the ancient markings on his skin begin to glow with a silver fire. "They're failing." "They were never meant to hold a pair." Cale looked at her then, his gaze heavy with a terrifying devotion. "Silas didn't just exile me to get rid of a traitor, Lyra. He did it because he knew that if we ever touched, his lies would burn to ash." The iron door had groaned shut, but the silence that followed was not empty. It was thick with the residue of Silas's malice. Lyra pressed her forehead against the cool bars of the cell, her breath coming in shallow hitches. The Alpha's threat of a reset felt like a noose tightening around her neck, but it was the calm in Cale's eyes that anchored her. "He won't just kill you, Cale," she whispered into the dark, her voice trembling. "He wants to break my wolf until there's nothing left but a shell he can command." Cale shifted, the silver-flecked chains clinking softly. The light Lyra had ignited in him earlier hadn't faded. It hummed beneath his skin like a dormant volcano. "He's desperate, Lyra. Desperate men cling to shadows when the sun begins to rise." He leaned forward, his face inches from the bars, his voice dropping to a low, forbidden rasp. "Did you never wonder why your wolf felt so sluggish these last few years? Why the bond felt like a heavy fog rather than a flame?" Lyra froze. She remembered the headaches, the strange, metallic tang in the air whenever Silas approached, and the way her wolf seemed to sleep even when she was wide awake. "I thought it was just the weight of duty." "It was a shroud," Cale said, his eyes darkening with a memory of fire and blood. "Years ago, I didn't just stumble upon a secret. I saw it. Silas found a ritual in the old texts, the Vincit sang. It uses the blood of an executed mate to mimic the resonance of a true bond. He's been weaving a web around you since you were a girl, feeding your wolf drops of his own corrupted power to make her think he was the only source of warmth in the world." Lyra felt a wave of nausea. The fated connection she had spent her life honoring wasn't a gift from the moon goddess. It was a parasitic tether designed by a man who saw her as a trophy. "The ceremony today wasn't supposed to be a choice," Cale continued, his hand reaching out to ghost over hers through the iron. "It was the final knot, but he underestimated one thing, the strength of a true mate. When our eyes met, the sheer frequency of our actual bond shattered his glass cage. He didn't just lose his bride today, Lyra. He lost his mask." The weight of the revelation crashed over her. Everything she knew was a manufactured lie, a political marriage enforced by dark magic. "He's going to execute me because as long as I draw breath, his magic is useless," Kale whispered, his grip tightening on her hand. "The truth is a fire, and Silas is terrified of getting burned." The moon reached its zenith, casting pale, skeletal fingers through the high slit in the dungeon wall. Outside, the rhythmic boots of the guards signaled a changing shift, her only window of opportunity. Lyra didn't wait for the courage to find her. She forced it into her veins. She reached through the cold bars once more, her palms pressing flat against the silver-flecked manacles that bit into Kale's scarred wrists. "Close your eyes," she whispered, her voice a low vibration that seemed to ripple through the very stone of the cell. She didn't reach for the magic Silas had taught her, the heavy, suffocating power of the pack. Instead, she reached inward, toward the silent, silver spark that had ignited the moment she looked at Kale. It was a raw, ancient hum, like the sound of stars colliding. As she called to it, her skin began to shimmer with a translucent luminescence. The heat didn't burn her. It flowed through her, focusing into a white-hot intensity at her fingertips. The silver-flecked iron, designed to suppress a wolf's spirit, began to groan. It didn't just break, it liquefied. Under the touch of her true-mate bond, the metal glowed incandescently, dripping away like wax from a candle. The suppression runes hissed and vanished, their dark magic evaporated by the purity of the light. Kale let out a choked gasp as the weight fell away, his muscles tensing as his wolf, suppressed for so long, surged back to the surface. He caught her hands, his eyes burning with a gratitude that went deeper than words. "You're more than a Luna, Lyra," he rasped, pulling her toward the heavy cell door. With a single, powerful kick fueled by his reclaimed strength, the lock shattered. They moved like shadows through the labyrinthine corridors, bypassing the drunken guards who slumped over their tables. The cool night air hit them like a physical shock as they slipped past the perimeter fence, the towering pines of the forbidden woods looming ahead like silent sentinels. Behind them, a horn blared, a harsh, discordant sound that tore through the night. The Alpha had discovered the empty cell. "Run," Kale commanded, his hand catching hers. They plunged into the thicket, the canopy swallowing the moonlight. Behind them, the baying of the pack's hounds began to rise, but as they crossed the threshold into the ancient trees, Lyra felt a strange shift in the air. The forest didn't feel dangerous. It felt like it was exhaling. For the first time in her life, she wasn't running away from her destiny. She was running toward it. The Forbidden Woods lived up to their name, a dense tangle of ancient roots and silver-threaded mist that seemed to bend and shift around them. They ran until the frantic braying of Silas's hounds grew muffled by the heavy dampness of the moss, finally collapsing into the hollow of a massive, hollowed-out willow. The air here was thick with the scent of old earth and ozone, vibrating with a frequency that made Lyra's skin tingle. As they sat in the darkness, their shoulders touching, a strange phenomenon began to take hold. Lyra felt a rhythmic thrumming in her chest, a double beat, steady and deep. She pressed a hand to her heart, then reached out to touch Kale's sternum. Under her palm, his heart was drumming in perfect, haunting unison with hers. It wasn't just a physical reaction, it was a synchronization of their very essences. The fear that had been clawing at her throat dissolved, replaced by a profound, echoing stillness. "Do you feel that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustle of the leaves. Kale looked at her, his silver-rimmed eyes reflecting the faint bioluminescence of the forest. "I've felt it every night for 5 years, Lyra, even in the frost of the exile lands, even in the dark of the pits." Lyra's breath hitched. 5 years, but you were banished long before I was even of age." "I never truly left," Kale admitted, his voice a low, melodic rumble that vibrated through her. "I stayed in the shadows of the Crescent territory. Every time you felt a sudden warmth on a winter night, or a predator backed away from you in the tall grass before you even saw it, that was me. I couldn't let Silas have you, even if I couldn't claim you myself. I was the ghost in your periphery, making sure his shadow didn't swallow you whole." A memory flashed in Lyra's mind. A night 3 years ago when she had been cornered by a rogue wolf near the border. She had closed her eyes, waiting for the strike, only to hear a terrifying roar and the sound of retreating paws. When she had looked up, she was alone, but the air had smelled exactly like Kale does now, of cedar and thunderstorms. You've been my guardian, she breathed, the weight of his devotion crashing over her. I stayed alive because I knew the moon wouldn't let a lie stand forever, Cale said, leaning his forehead against hers. As their skin met, the heartbeat grew louder, a thundering cadence that seemed to command the forest to stay silent. I didn't wait to save you, Lyra. I waited for you to find the strength to save yourself, and tonight you did. In the shared rhythm of their hearts, Lyra realized that her life hadn't been a series of accidents. It had been a long, slow walk toward this man, guided by a protector who had loved her from the darkness long before she knew his name. The piece of the willow hollow was shattered by the sharp, metallic snap of a crossbow being cocked. The silence of the forest didn't fade. It was murdered. From the dense fog beyond the trees, a dozen pairs of eyes ignited, not with the silver glow of the bond, but with the harsh, artificial amber of wolves fueled by Silas's dark stimulants. The Alpha's elite, Cale hissed, his body shifting instantly into a protective crouch. They aren't tracking by scent. They're tracking the magical resonance of the bond. The trees seemed to part as the hunters emerged, led by Commander Varric, Silas's most ruthless enforcer. In the pale moonlight, the silver-tipped arrows they leveled at Cale's chest gleamed with a lethal promise. Silas hadn't sent a retrieval party, he had sent a firing squad. Step away from the traitor, Lyra, Varric commanded, his voice cold and hollow. The Alpha is merciful. He says if you return now, the execution will be quick. If you resist, we are authorized to bring you back in chains. Before Lyra could speak, an arrow whistled through the air. Cale moved with a speed that defied human sight, catching the shaft inches from Lyra's throat. The silver tip hissed against his palm, burning his flesh, but he didn't let go. He shoved her behind him, his muscles rippling as a low, tectonic growl shook the ground beneath their feet. Run, Lyra, Cale roared. The sacred grove is 2 miles north. They can't follow you into the hallowed ground. I'm not leaving you, she cried, but Cale was already a blur of motion. He lunged into the circle of hunters, a whirlwind of raw, unbridled fury. He fought not as a man, but as a force of nature, using his reclaimed strength to shatter bows and uproot small trees to create a barricade. But there were too many of them. Varric raised a heavy, silver-weighted net, and Lyra saw the trap closing. Every time Cale struck a hunter down, 2 more took their place, their movements synchronized by the dark magic Silas had woven into their minds. Lyra felt a surge of desperation so potent it turned the air around her cold. She watched as a silver-tipped spear grazed Cale's flank, spilling blood that glowed like molten mercury on the forest floor. Her wolf didn't just howl then, she roared, a sound that harmonized with Cale's pain. I won't let you die for me, Lyra screamed, her hands sparking with that strange, ancient silver light once again. But as she moved to help, Varric's second wave closed in, cutting off her path to Cale and driving her toward the treacherous path of the moon cliff. The path narrowed until the forest fell away entirely, replaced by the jagged, wind-swept expanse of Moon Cliff. Below them, the sea churned against the rocks, a 1,000-foot drop into white foam and oblivion. Lyra stumbled to the edge, her lungs burning, only to find the path blocked. Silas stepped out from the tree line, flanked by his elite guard. Behind him, 2 hunters dragged Cale, who was bloodied and bound once more in heavy silver wire. A spear tip was pressed firmly against the hollow of Cale's throat. The hunt is over, Lyra, Silas said, his voice terrifyingly calm. He walked toward her, his boots crunching on the loose shale. You've had your little rebellion. You felt the thrill of the traitor's touch. Now look at the cost. He gestured to Cale, who struggled against the silver wire, his eyes fixed on Lyra with a desperate, silent plea. Jump. Save yourself. Here is the deal, Silas continued, stopping just out of reach. Walk to me. Let me place the collar on your neck and return to the pack as my Luna. If you do, I will let him live in the pits. He will be a slave, but he will breathe. He stepped closer, his shadow stretching over her. But if you take one more step toward that ledge, or if you try to use that flickering light in your veins, I will order the spear driven through his heart before you can even blink. Choose, Lyra, his life for your soul. Lyra looked at Cale. The bond between them hummed, a low, grieving melody. She felt his pain as if it were her own, but deeper than the pain, she felt his pride. He didn't want to be a bargaining chip in a tyrant's game. "Go," Kale croaked, the spear drawing a bead of silver blood. "Don't let him win." Silas laughed, a dry, hollow sound. "He thinks he's a hero, but you know the truth, don't you? You're a creature of the pack, you need a master, you need me." He held out a hand, his eyes gleaming with a sickening, triumphant obsession. "Come home, Lyra." Lyra looked at the hand, then at the man she loved, and finally at the moon hanging heavy and pregnant in the sky. A strange, cold clarity washed over her. The fear didn't vanish, it transformed. "You're right about one thing, Silas," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that seemed to carry across the entire cliff. "The hunt is over." She didn't walk toward him. She took a step back, her heels hovering over the abyss. The air grew unnaturally still, the wind dying as if the world itself were holding its breath. Silas's triumphant smirk flickered, then faded, replaced by a twitch of unease. "Lyra, get away from the edge," he barked, his voice losing its calm. "I gave you a choice." "You gave me a lie," Lyra said, her voice echoing with a resonance that didn't sound human. "And you forgot one thing about the legends, Silas. The moon doesn't choose a Luna to serve a king. She chooses a queen to rule the night." She closed her eyes and stopped fighting the tide rising inside her. Instead of reaching for her wolf, she reached deeper, past the fur and the fangs, into the primordial stardust of her lineage. Suddenly, a shockwave of silver light erupted from her chest, so bright it turned the night into a blinding, celestial noon. The hunters screamed, shielding their eyes as the silver wire binding Kale didn't just melt, it shattered into dust. The ground beneath the cliff began to tremble, and from the depths of the forest, a low, synchronized howl rose from thousands of throats. Lyra didn't shift into a wolf, she became something else. Her skin turned the color of moonlight, translucent and shimmering. Her hair floated upward, a halo of liquid silver, and her eyes opened to reveal twin pools of radiant, star-white fire. The air pressure dropped so sharply that the elite guards fell to their knees, gasping for breath. This wasn't the power of a shifter, it was the authority of the source. Silas staggered back, his face pale with a terror he couldn't mask. "The ancient, the silver spirit, it's a myth." "I am the myth you tried to cage," Lyra spoke, and her voice was a choir of whispers that seemed to vibrate in the very marrow of every wolf present. She raised her hand, and the spear held at Kale's throat turned to ice, crumbling between the guard's fingers. Kale stood, his wounds knitting together under the glow of her presence. He looked at her not with the possessiveness of an alpha, but with the awe of a believer. The ancient power sang in Lyra's blood, commanding the elements, calling to the dormant spirits of the earth. The hunters weren't just afraid, they were instinctively submitting, their bodies forcing them into a bow. The Luna was gone. The queen had arrived. The silver radiance emanating from Lyra didn't just illuminate the cliff, it stripped Silas of his perceived divinity. As the light touched the surrounding wolves, the dark stimulants in their systems, the artificial rage Silas had cultivated, withered like weeds in a furnace. One by one, the elite hunters slumped, their heads bowing not by command, but by the overwhelming weight of her ancient frequency. Silas stood alone, his knees shaking as he clutched at his chest, trying to hold onto the fragment of stolen authority he had left. "I am your alpha," he shrieked, the sound pathetic against the humming silence of the moon. "Attack, kill her." But no one moved. Even the wind seemed to wait for Lyra's word. Kale walked through the kneeling ranks of his former enemies, his eyes never leaving Lyra. He reached her side, and as he touched her hand, the silver light flared, knitting them into a singular, blinding beacon. He didn't bow. He stood as her equal, the anchor to her celestial storm. "The era of the cage is over, Silas," Kale said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had survived the dark to see the dawn. Lyra looked down at Silas, her glowing eyes devoid of the hatred he deserved, filled instead with a terrible, divine pity. "You spent your life trying to master the moon," she said, "but you never learned to listen to her." With a simple wave of her hand, the Alpha's mark on Silas's neck, the symbol of his power, turned to ash. He let out a strangled cry, collapsing into the dirt as his connection to the pack's strength was severed forever. He was no longer a king. He was a man, small and shivering in the cold. From the forests below, hundreds of wolves emerged, their eyes shimmering with a reflected silver glow. They didn't growl. They didn't snap. They moved in a massive, silent wave, surrounding the cliff and lowering their heads to the earth in a collective act of submission. The Crescent Pack was no more. In its place stood a nation that had finally found its true heart. "What now, my queen?" Kale whispered, his fingers interlacing with hers. Lyra looked out over the territory, feeling every heartbeat, every breath, and every dream of her people. The bond between her and Kale was no longer a secret whisper in a dungeon. It was the foundation of a new world. As Lyra stepped forward to claim her power, Kale collapsed to his knees. The moon always demands a sacrifice.
If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Don't forget to leave a comment and tell us what you think about the story. We love hearing from you. Your support helps keep this channel alive and bringing you amazing, interesting, and powerful alpha stories. Thank you for being here.